Because my sister and I fell off the cliff, I was the one who managed to climb back up in the end. That's why Yuan Su has hated me all his life. So, he publicly broke off our engagement. During the hunt, he broke one of my legs, condemning me to a lifetime of limping. He even sent me to the enemy camp for marriage. But after I finally had a home in the enemy nation, he led an army thousands of miles to destroy it all. Zhuzi, come back with me. He had a sudden change of heart, but I had already turned away from the sea of bitterness long ago. 01. Mother, it hurts. My leg. With tear-filled eyes, I watched the physician pull out the broken arrow. The intense pain tore at my nerves. I instinctively reached out to my mother, like a child seeking comfort, but she instinctively took a step back. For a moment, it seemed she was lost in thought. Back then, did you hurt as much as I do now? 2 lines of clear tears ran down her cheeks. Father, heartbroken, held mother and left, leaving me with only the 2 retreating figures. The hand that had been hovering in midair finally fell. Clutching the quilt tightly, no more sounds came from me. What a night it was. Exhausted and faint, I lost consciousness. But the pain from the wound cut through my skin, awakening me. Life and death, dreams and reality, intermingled. Half awake, I wondered if I had died when we fell off the cliff. Wouldn't everyone be happier then? Father and mother wouldn't have lost their most proud eldest daughter, and Yuan Su wouldn't have lost his beloved. How wonderful the past was. The Pingyang Marquis family had 2 beautiful daughters who were close friends with the Crown Prince Yuan Su from a young age, with deep feelings for each other. Yuan Su had an engagement with the Jiang family's daughter. The eldest daughter, Shujin, was intelligent and shared a deep connection with Yuan Su, communicating their mutual feelings. They were a pair admired by everyone in the capital for their talents and beauty. Everyone took it for granted that the engagement was for Jiang Yi and Yuan Su. As for the younger Jiang Zhu, though lively and cute, she was overshadowed by Jiang Yi, the most talented girl in the capital, whose brilliance was too overwhelming. People simply forgot about Jiang Zhu, even calling her Jiang Yi's younger sister when mentioned. Even the Pingyang Marquis and his wife were more partial to Jiang Yi. As for Yuan Su, while he was said to have grown up with the Jiang family's second daughter, most of the time he enjoyed conversations with Jiang Yi, while I trailed behind them slowly with a candied hawthorn, admiring the pair. Everything ended abruptly on the 5th day of the last month's autumn hunt. My sister Jiang Yi and I fell off the cliff together. Everyone was frantic, trying their best to search and rescue. Finally, when I was rescued by the guards from the cliff, there was a deathly silence. Father and mother's weary backs finally collapsed. The light in Yuan Su's eyes dimmed little by little. There was a collective sigh. I sat on the ground, surrounded by desolation. I was saved, but no one was happy about it. Not even myself. The guards gave me simple first aid and reported back to Yuan Su. There was a platform on the cliff where one person could stand. I found Miss Zhang Er there. As for Miss Zhang Da, it's estimated, I finally came back to my senses from the fear, tears flowing from my eyes. It was my sister who left the standing stone for me. Sister, she fell down by herself. Yet, in an instant, everyone's gaze towards me changed. Suspicion, wariness, blame. It felt like a silent interrogation. I heard this second young girl has always been jealous of her sister's engagement with the crown prince. Could it be that Miss Jiangda pushed her sister down, wanting the engagement for herself? Finally, someone voiced the suspicion. Those doubtful looks turned into tangible accusations. It felt like I was already condemned by just a few words. Father and mother's eyes were filled with resentment and struggle. And Yuan Su's gaze towards me grew colder by the moment. 02. I met Yuan Su before my sister did. At that time, I was only 10 years old, but everyone had high hopes for me. Since my sister was so outstanding, at just 12 she had already gained fame. So everyone naturally thought I should be exceptional as well. As a result, both my parents and the tutors at the academy had high expectations for me. They often made me memorize 10 pages of poetry in a night, or asked me to write essays on the spot. However, I was quite slow in my studies and was often punished with hand slaps from the disappointed tutors or scolded by my parents. One day, when the tutor punished me to copy an essay 50 times, I ran out with the papers in tears. I hid and cried while writing under the eaves, feeling pitiful. At that moment, Yuan Su appeared and gave me a piece of candy. He patted my head and told me that everyone has their own talents and strengths, and not to force myself. Then, he copied half of the book for me, mimicking my clumsy handwriting. That day was the first time someone told me that everyone has their own path. It was also the first time someone didn't scold me, but helped me with my writing. Under the warm sunlight, I looked up at his jade-like face and felt a fluttering in my heart. His words were so kind and right that I thought he might also be someone who wasn't good at studies, but was a clumsy yet adorable person. I liked him and wanted to be friends with him. So, I often sneaked into the palace to find him after class. I would ask him to help me with my writing, fish with a twig, or climb trees to get bird eggs. Since my academic performance wasn't great, my allowance was very small. I used to spend it all on the day I got it. But after having such a good friend, I saved up and kept it for buying candied hawthorns to share with him next time we met. I liked this friend so much. So, I introduced him to my sister. I wanted my two favorite people to meet. It was at a poetry gathering. I sneaked in and was yawning and complaining to Yuan Su about how difficult the riddles were. My sister stood up from her seat and answered the riddles fluently. Excited, I tugged at Yuan Su's sleeve and said, "That's my sister. Look." But Yuan Su had already been watching. He smiled and gazed intently at my sister. That day, my sister wore a moon-white dress and stood gracefully under the magnolia tree, like a fairy descending in spring. She seemed to notice me and looked at me with a gentle gaze, tender and affectionate. I saw Yuan Su sit up straight beside me, but my sister's gaze passed over him, without stopping. Yuan Su drank from his cup and stood up, picking a riddle effortlessly. The people in the courtyard frowned in confusion, while my sister thought for a moment and answered calmly. Yuan Su wore a green robe that day, with a gentle breeze stirring the ribbon in his hair, his youthful eyes filled with a joyful smile. Don't you think the Crown Prince and Jiang Yi make a great pair? They're a perfect match. People whispered among themselves. That day, I first realized. My friend who always helped me with my writing was none other than the brilliant and talented Crown Prince Yuan Su. He was different from me, a rising star, holding jade and treasures. He was the true match for my sister. Compared to the right person, my own position was insignificant. Yuan Su and my sister shared deep feelings over time, which was inevitable. I went from being Yuan Su's friend and my sister's younger sister to a distant observer of the two. They are now the closest to each other, lost and anxious. But just as before, the things I wanted always slipped through my fingers like sand, unable to be held onto, only able to watch them drift away. I had to learn to hide my emotions and become numb. 03. My sister was so wonderful, and it was inevitable that Yuan Su loved her. So, it was I who was rescued from the bottom of the cliff, not my sister. I was once again accused of deliberately pushing my sister off. It was inevitable that he would hate me. My sister's body was never found. Father and mother wept uncontrollably. Mother even fainted at one point, and when she woke up, she often babbled incoherently and became mentally unhinged. I had originally been by mother's side, but whenever mother saw me, she would frantically attack me. Her sharp nails dug into my flesh as her eyes turned red and her expression became crazed. "Is it you? Is it you?" She demanded answers, but before I could respond, she was already certain. As winter approached, a hot charcoal brazier burned in mother's room. The windows were tightly shut, but suddenly, countless snowflakes and wind blew in. I shivered with cold and felt dizzy. Somehow, I suddenly remembered a night long ago. I had passed by the courtyard and seen a beautiful fan on the stone table. So, I picked it up out of envy and looked at it. But mother saw me. The ruler hit my palms, and the sharp pain made my head spin. At that time, I learned that it was something mother had rewarded my sister for her excellent studies. My sister had fallen in the courtyard. Do you have to steal or snatch things you cannot earn yourself? I've tolerated your mediocrity, but now you secretly covet your sister's things. I was so young that I didn't even understand what covet meant. But the pain from the ruler was too much. I could only cry and shout, complying with mother's demands, reading out loud 100 times in the courtyard in front of the servants and maids. I am a thief. I am despicable. Because my mother came from a prestigious family, she always demanded high moral standards. When the emperor arranged the marriage between Yuan Su and the Jiang family, he did not specify which daughter. Logically, after Jiang Yi's death, it should have been me. Even if father and mother were unwilling, they had no choice. However, the day after Jiang Yi's death was confirmed, Yuan Su came to the Jiang residence to break off the engagement. Even though it was against the emperor's will, he did it publicly in front of the whole city. His fiancé could only be Jiang Yi. Father and mother wept as they faced Yuan Su. The onlookers also sighed over Yuan Su and Jiang Yi's genuine feelings. Only I stood outside Jiang Yi's memorial hall, unable to do anything, not even making a single defense, and was swiftly marked as an adversary and a villain with malicious intent. After that, Yuan Su wore mourning clothes and kept vigil for 3 days for Jiang Yi. Though we were not fated to marry, I, Yuan Su, mourn as if I have lost my wife. It was unconventional and improper, but it showed his grief. At night, after everyone had gone to bed, I dared to leave my room to offer incense to Jiang Yi. But as soon as I had bowed once, someone grabbed my wrist from behind. The incense in my hand broke and fell to the ground. Jiang Zhu, who are you to offer incense for her? I was thrown to the ground with great force. In front of me stood Yuan Su in mourning clothes, with a grim expression. It wasn't me who pushed my sister. You know I could never. I explained through my tears. I know you didn't push her. He smiled. But why did you go there? Why didn't you listen to Jiang Yi's repeated warnings? If you hadn't gone, Jiang Yi wouldn't have been worried and followed you. She wouldn't have accidentally fallen with you. I fell silent. This was the greatest regret of my life. Because I saw Yuan Su and my sister being close, I was in pain and rode away on horseback to clear my mind. But unexpectedly, my sister worried about me and came after me. The horse was startled, and we both fell off the cliff. Yuan Su's eyes were red as he slowly tore open the greatest wound in our hearts. Clearly in extreme grief, yet his smile seemed to grow more pleased. He cruelly lifted me by the neck from the ground. Jiang Zhu, why wasn't it you who jumped? If the platform could only hold one person, why didn't you feel ashamed and jump down yourself? Jiang Zhu, if you had died today, there wouldn't be so many people grieving. We used to be friends, the people who understood each other the most. So he knew exactly where to stab the deepest pain. Yes, I have always been insignificant, not valued. If I had died today, who would mourn for me tonight? I slowly closed my eyes in suffocation, but Yuan Su suddenly let go, throwing me to the ground. Get out. Don't dirty Jiang Yi's memorial hall. Stumbling out of the hall, I knelt in the snowstorm that had started at some point. Why did my sister have to die? Why not me? Since everyone wished for it to be me. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to adjust, or if you need further assistance. 04. Yuan Su publicly defied the emperor's will and broke off his engagement with the Jiang family. The emperor was furious and forced Yuan Su to honor his marriage contract with me. Yuan Su resisted. In the end, we each took a step back, and I entered the Eastern Palace. However, I was only a consort of the crown prince. Everyone knew that the position of crown princess was reserved for someone else. This marriage, which displeased everyone, was eventually held in silence. After the wedding, while publicly I was the crown prince's consort, privately, I was a menial servant in the Eastern Palace, even lower than the most ordinary maid. This was Yuan Su's way of punishing me. The people in the Eastern Palace had once admired my sister's reputation, but now, having heard rumors that I'd caused her death out of jealousy, and following Yuan Su's orders, they treated me with various forms of humiliation. I accepted this cold treatment almost resignedly, as a form of atonement. In just 6 months, my hands were calloused, and I had become so thin that I could encircle my waist with one hand. I had caused Yuan Su to lose his beloved for life and my parents to lose their most cherished daughter. I deserved to die 1,000 deaths. But I never expected that Yuan Su would want my life. During the autumn hunt of the following year, bandits broke into the hunting grounds and took me hostage as leverage. As the crown prince's consort, I was the only female member of his court. Even without personal feelings, there was still a layer of identity and face to consider. Yet Yuan Su drew his bow without hesitation. His first arrow grazed my face, leaving a trail of blood. The bandit cursed under his breath, dragging me as cover while retreating. But Yuan Su, with a cold face, shot another arrow. I looked at his eyes, which were as lifeless as death itself, and his archery was without a trace of emotion. In that moment, I seemed to be just like the bandit, a worthless, dead person. So many days spent together under the eaves of the school eating cold cakes. So many days spent together picking lotus flowers and playing in the pond. Only I remember. The arrow hit my knee with precision. The excruciating pain made me uncontrollably collapse to the ground. The bandits had to abandon me and leave first, while Yuan Su rode after them, not even casting a glance my way as he passed. The bandit raid was well planned, with many participants. Some young masters and young ladies from noble families, protected by their attendants, retreated from the battlefield. I, too, was hiding with my broken leg, but a loud neigh pierced my ears. A young master from a noble family intentionally lingered near me for a moment, exposing my position. Before leaving, he gave me a cruel and satisfying smile. "Go and accompany Miss Jiang to the afterlife." Oh, I recognize him. He was my sister's close friend and admirer. After my sister's death, everyone was indignant on her behalf. I had become the rat everyone wanted to kill. Even when going out to buy a book, people would throw mud and eggs at me. This wasn't the first time I had seen him. On that day, he had deliberately knocked me to the ground with his horse, causing me to fall and bleed from my head. Perhaps he thought that wasn't enough. Because of the commotion he caused, the bandits found me. One of them treated me as a trophy, lifting me onto his horse and joining the main group. While the court troops and bandits fought fiercely, Yuan Su displayed his bravery and defeated the bandits. But in the nearby forest, bandit archers ambushed Yuan Su and shot him with a hidden arrow. Yuan Su was shot off his horse and was about to be struck by a bandit from behind. I don't know where I found the strength, but I jumped off the horse during the chaos, stumbling towards Yuan Su, and took the blow for him. Unfortunately, the momentum was too great. I fell with Yuan Su down the slope and into a mountain stream. The turbulent water carried us, and I didn't know where we would drift. But with the last of my strength, I tied our hands together with my belt. In the dim cave, I woke up before Yuan Su. The arrow that Yuan Su had shot into my knee was deeply embedded, causing unbearable pain with every movement. The wound on my shoulder from taking the blade for Yuan Su was deep, continuously oozing blood. In the Eastern Palace, I had long ceased to be the little girl who would cry at a ruler's hit. I gritted my teeth, tore a piece from my skirt, and hastily bandaged the wound, then surveyed the dim cave. Although it was remote, there was a flow of water. Following the water, I might find a way out. The arrow in Yuan Su's wound was too deep and dangerous. I repeatedly washed the cloth and tried to stem the bleeding, but it soaked through with blood. Fortunately, during my time in the Eastern Palace, I had learned about some medicinal herbs. Eventually, I managed to stop the bleeding and bandaged him. I gathered some fallen branches in the cave to make a makeshift raft and carried Yuan Su along the water flow. The coarse cloth wrapped tightly around my flesh. At first, it was painful and swollen. Later, it became itchy, then ulcerated and scabbed, and eventually worn and torn from the journey. In the dim passage, I had to wade through a deep pool of water. I had to let go of the raft, carrying Yuan Su on my back, and wade through the water inch by inch. But the weather seemed to have turned bad, with a heavy rain outside, causing the water level to rise repeatedly, and the raft vanished in the turbulent current. In the dark surroundings and the raging water, The wound was being washed inch by inch, causing pain. I repeatedly wanted to sink into the water, but I still stood up and dragged Yuan Su to the shore. In the process, Yuan Su woke up for a moment. He was dazed and didn't understand the situation. I quickly rubbed the wood strips to start a fire, and seeing him awake, I gave him a bit of water. "I will get you out." He lost consciousness again. Holding his hand, I repeatedly promised. My hand, worn and bloodied from the rough wood strips, held his, stained with blood as well. Instinctively, I released his hand and washed away the bloodstains. I owe Yuan Su a life. I must repay him. And the life I owe my parents, I will use my own to pay back. Another day passed, perhaps not even daylight. Because I had been in the dark for so long, I could no longer distinguish time. I found the exit and knelt in the blazing sunlight with Yuan Su. Tears of joy streamed down my face. 05. The wounds on my body weren't too severe, except for the arrow Yuan Su had shot into my knee. It remained lodged for a long time. Even if it was removed, the best outcome would be that my leg would be permanently lame. When the arrow was being extracted, my parents were by my side. I hadn't seen them for a long time. It was the emperor's gratitude for saving Yuan Su that allowed them to come to the palace to accompany me. During the process of the arrow removal, I lost consciousness several times. By the end, I was barely aware of what was happening. It felt like I was back when I was a child, before there was such a large rift between us. I whimpered and reached out to my mother. "It hurts." "Mother." But father took mother away. Mother said that when she saw me, all she could think of was the image of my sister falling from the cliff. She was filled with hatred and pain. Eventually, I regained full consciousness and took in my surroundings. I was in the coldest palace in the Eastern Palace. "Consort, if it hurts, I can apply more medicine." The imperial physician heard me. I shook my head. "It doesn't hurt anymore." I continued to sleep for a long time. When I awoke, Yuan Su was by my bedside. Seeing me awake, his eyes lit up. "Zhuzi." Time seemed to rush back in an instant. This was a name Yuan Su used to call me when we were friends. After he met my sister, he started calling me little sister like her. I was startled, trying to sit up, but he pressed me back down, carefully covering me with a quilt. "Why is it so desolate here in the palace? Didn't I notice it before?" He frowned as he looked around. "You should stay in my quarters for the time being, so your injury doesn't worsen." Live in the same palace? I stared at him in shock. "Idiot. What are you looking at? I just want you to heal properly. What are you thinking?" Trying to cover it up, Yuan Su's ears turned red. He turned his head away, his voice softening. "Besides, they say you're already my consort." Hearing these words in a daze, a guess finally took shape in my mind. I hurried to confirm with the imperial physician. Yuan Su had fallen from a cliff and hit his head. Though he wasn't physically severely injured, he had lost his memory, specifically the memories of when he met my sister. "It may be due to his deep sorrow over Miss Zhang's departure," the physician said, trembling as he knelt before the emperor. The emperor pondered for a moment and then waved his sleeve. "Since that is the case, the person has already passed. If he doesn't remember now, then there's no need for him to remember." Everyone in the Eastern Palace knelt in agreement. From then on, no one would mention Jiang Yi in front of Yuan Su. As the emperor walked past me, he paused for a moment. "I know you are a dutiful child. From now on, live well with Su'er." The emperor's hand rested on my shoulder. It seemed like a kind reminder, but it was also a silent warning and command. I stood rigidly, finally lowering my gaze. Yuan Su had loved my sister so much, to the point of life and death, yet his pain was such that he only forgot her. Now he was being deceived by someone he hated most under the guise of what was best for him. Isn't that cruel? And I, when a target was needed, could be readily pushed forward to be shot with countless arrows, crushed to pieces. When I had some value, I could be picked up and pieced together again. They said we could still live well. Just when I thought I could be free from debt and live alone, I knelt for a while longer, eventually regaining my senses and struggling to rise. Dragging my crippled leg, I moved slowly towards the palace door. But when I reached the threshold, my body faltered, and I nearly fell. Zhuzi, a pair of warm hands caught me, naturally allowing me to lean on him. Just hearing that voice, I couldn't help but shiver all over. The pain in my leg was excruciating. The sounds of blades and swords seemed to press against my face, growing more intense. I mustered strength I didn't know I had and pushed with all my might. Yet his chest was like a solid wall, unmoving. His hot hands gripped my wrist, pulling me into his embrace. I can't remember many things. The nights were too long, so long that I almost couldn't wake up. But fortunately, there was someone who kept holding me, repeatedly warming my hands, saying they would take me out. His chin rested on my shoulder. His warm breath brushed against my ear, but the silver pendant on his chest pressed against the exposed skin.
It was cold and sharp.
It hurt. Zhuzi, this leg of yours is injured for me. In the future, I will be your legs. I've forgotten too much, so let's start over from the beginning. 06. Yuan Su remembered everything between us, including the times he took me to sneak bites of chicken legs made by the Imperial Kitchen, including the times he cursed me while having me copy books, including the times I brought him treasured fruit candies, only for the hot weather to melt them into my palms. He would scold me for being foolish while washing my hands with pond water. The years that were forgotten in between naturally connected to the fulfillment of our marriage contract, and we became husband and wife. I never expected to end up marrying you, this little brat, he said as he applied medicine to my wounds, reflecting on it. I clenched my hands in silence. Since his amnesia, I seemed to always remain silent, unwilling to lie or speak against my own wishes.
So I simply said nothing.
However, contrary to my intentions, his hot breath on my bare shoulder caused a light itch. I flinched as if burned and tried to escape, but I was pulled back by the grip on my wrist from behind. Why are you running away? A cold substance was applied to my wound, but it wasn't medicine. I trembled. What are you doing? Soft, delicate, and cool lips touched the ghastly wound on my shoulder. That was a wound inflicted by a bandit while I was protecting Yuan Su. It had been deep enough to see the bone, but now only a scar remained. The imperial physician had said that if it hadn't been for subsequent infections and delayed treatment, it might have healed better. This scar, is it also for me? Jiangzhu. He turned my body to face him and placed a serious kiss on my forehead. I will treat you well for the rest of my life. Yuan Su did not go back on his word. For the next 3 years, he treated me very well. In the Eastern Palace, I was the only female resident. When it was inconvenient for me to go out, he personally learned the craft from a carpenter and made a wheelchair for me. He would push me out to enjoy the sunlight after court sessions. On rainy days, when my knee pain kept me awake, he read medical books and massaged my legs. What are you doing? His voice suddenly came from behind, startling me so much that the sharp needle tore through my flesh, causing a stream of blood to drip down. I instinctively reached to stop it, but Yuan Su was faster. He took my finger directly into his mouth. I was both surprised and scared. What are you doing? He did not answer, merely holding my finger in his mouth until the bleeding stopped before releasing it. As if this were an entirely ordinary act for him. He took the object from my hand, examined it, and his eyes brightened. You're making clothes for me? He compared it to himself and raised an approving eyebrow. Thank you, madam. He approached me like a large cat, his voice affectionate and gentle. I tensed and tried to pull away, but he held my chin, his cool lips meeting mine. As I leaned back, I collapsed onto the beautiful couch behind me, making it easier for him to continue. His sharp teeth lightly touched my lips, then moved to my neck, biting and sucking. I struggled desperately, nearly in tears. Yuan Su. No. He looked at me with dark, somber eyes. Seeing the tears in the corners of my eyes, he halted all his actions. Why? His voice was deep and tinged with bitterness. You took arrows for me, got injured for me, even died for me. Then why can't this be allowed? Jiangzhu, do you really love me? I didn't know how to answer. Yuan Su finally lowered his eyes in disappointment, as if mocking himself, and turned to leave. I was stunned for a while before managing to pick up the clothing I had sewn with effort. A single tear fell onto the golden thread. Every day over these 3 years, I had been living in fear and anxiety. Yuan Su did indeed treat me exceptionally well, to the point that I had never seen such kindness in my life. It was unique and incomparable. Yet I knew it was all an illusion, a mirage that could shatter at a touch. As soon as Yuan Su recovered his memory, I would be doomed. I had tried to escape countless times, yet had also sunk into this illusion of goodness countless times. I had never experienced love, so I yearned for it even more. Even the slightest hint of love was enough to make me lose my mind. The feeling of being loved was so good that I allowed myself to truly stay by Yuan Su's side for 3 years. Yet I knew Yuan Su's heart. No matter life or death, he belonged to my sister. He was untouchable to me. But I didn't expect this day to come so quickly. The emperor passed away, and Yuan Su ascended to the throne. The matters of the empress and consort should also be settled. At this time, my parents, who had been traveling in Jiangnan for leisure, returned to the capital. Hearing that Yuan Su and I had been living harmoniously for 3 years, they entered the palace overnight. My mother collapsed in front of Yuan Su, crying. She asked if he remembered my sister. At first, the emperor had sealed the news of Yuan Su's amnesia and forbade anyone from mentioning my sister to him. He even had my parents sent out of the capital, but he hadn't anticipated their return. Or perhaps he had. He just didn't expect my mother to hate me so deeply, to hate her own daughter so intensely. She must want me to be utterly ruined. 07. From the time of drafting the decree for the consort until being cast into the cold palace, it took no more than 3 days. When I received the news, I actually breathed a sigh of relief. Those things that didn't belong to me had occupied too long. That night, when Yuan Su came to find me, I was still eating, having a bowl of thin porridge with a plate of cold dishes. Furious, Yuan Su grabbed my sleeve and yanked me up, his veins bulging as he gripped my neck. "Jiangzhu, how dare you?" The words were unfinished. Was he questioning how I dared deceive him, or how I dared so shamelessly accept everything that didn't belong to me? Perhaps both. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for his anger and revenge. But the next moment I was violently thrown to the ground. He left in a huff. I knew that Yuan Su would not let me off so easily. As expected, the next day, I was taken to Yunding Temple. The nuns there, under Yuan Su's orders, shaved off all my hair. Yuan Su wanted me to recite scriptures day and night, praying for my sister here. I stayed at Yunding Temple for 6 months. The nuns, seemingly under Yuan Su's orders, were often harsh with me. I did all the hard work like fetching water and chopping wood. But I was a lame, so my work was inherently clumsy. There was even a fierce nun who used a whip. Any small mistake I made resulted in a lash. Over time, it was difficult to find a single good spot on my back. This was worse than when I was in the Eastern Palace. At night, I could only sleep on my stomach. If I turned over even slightly, the pain was unbearable. Today was the 15th day. After eating some of the last remaining cold rice, I climbed into bed to rest. Moonlight streamed through the window frame. I forced myself to look up. The moon was so full tonight. As I looked up, the spots on my back that had been beaten began to burn with pain again. So I put my head back down. I was so tired and my body still ached. The pain in my knee seemed to be drilling into the bone. I rubbed my forehead against my arm, as if seeking comfort. My eyes felt sore and swollen, but no tears would come. I realized I hadn't cried in a long time. I pulled the cold, thin blanket tighter around me and looked at the moonlight scattered on the floor. I couldn't help but secretly ask myself, when a person is born, do they see their entire life? It shouldn't be so. Otherwise, how could anyone choose such a painful life? I drifted into a hazy sleep. The next day, however, I received word to return to the palace. Back to the familiar cold palace. After finally falling asleep wrapped in a thicker blanket, I woke up to find Yuan Su standing by my bed, his gaze inscrutable. "Do you know your mistake?" he asked. Holding the blanket, I nodded obediently. I know my mistake. In the interval of nodding, the scars on the back of my neck were exposed. Yuan Su's face was cold as he lifted my blanket, forcing me to lower my head and reveal my back. Scars crisscrossed across my back.
Who did this?
Through gritted teeth, Yuan Su's voice was cold, like winter night water. The nuns at the temple. After a long while, the blanket was returned and covered my head. Jiangzhu, this is what you deserve. Yuan Su stormed out in anger. I held the blanket and fell back into a heavy sleep. Yuan Su and my mother were truly similar. Interrogations and harsh treatment were just to make me admit my mistakes, my shortcomings, to force me to acknowledge my own worthlessness as they saw fit. Fortunately, my mother had beaten me so many times with a ruler. I had long since stopped caring about that bit of purity and dignity. Whatever they wanted, I would give. What did it matter what the truth was? 08. A month after returning to the palace, Yuan Su seemed to have come up with a new way to torment me. He had me change into bright red clothes and dance among the courtesans for the king of Qi and his envoys. The two nations were forming a friendly alliance and intended to arrange a marriage. The king of Qi was interested in me. I accepted without any hesitation. What could be worse than this? That night, Yuan Su came again. He was drunk and out of his mind. He pinned me down, his lips and tongue tangled with mine. I struggled and bit him, drawing blood. But the taste of blood seemed to excite him further. He easily dislocated my joints. He pressed down on me, kissing me more deeply and forcefully, as if wanting to devour me. My clothes were torn open, revealing my skin. The rough quilt against the wound on my back seemed to reopen it, causing more blood to seep out. Jiangzhu, you're unwilling to give yourself to me, but you're so happy to marry someone else. Yuan Su propped himself up, his mouth stained with the blood I had drawn. His entire face looked enchanting yet sinister, making one's heart tremble. I should have killed you long ago. He chuckled, tightening his fingers around my neck, but loosened his grip just as I was about to suffocate. He bit my chest, sucking the blood. I hoarsely called out, Yuan Su, do you think of my sister? At these words, all his actions stopped abruptly. Do you even have the right to mention her to me? He threw me aside and turned to leave. I gasped for breath, trying to alleviate the suffocation. The night was too cold, and I hugged the quilt tightly. Today, the palace servants told me I was to be sent away for the marriage alliance. I wasn't even sad. Perhaps sadness would come from reluctance. But here, I had no lingering attachments. On the day I was to leave for Qi, I did not see Yuan Su again. I was led by the palace servants to the carriage of the king of Qi. The winter was too cold. The man wore a snow-white fox fur coat and held a warming stove. When he saw me board the carriage, he smiled gently. You've arrived. He seemed to be in poor health, and even this simple sentence lacked strength. The carriage jolted violently, and his back hit the carriage wall. The man's face turned pale, and he coughed a couple of times. I quickly poured some water for him. Thank you. After drinking, he smiled warmly at me. For the first time, someone said thank you to me. And he was a king. I looked down but couldn't help but glance at him again. The man noticed my gaze and looked over. I'm Qi. And you? I bit my lip. Jiangzhu. He smiled. Little Zhu. 09. Little Zhu, how do you like this bird? The man furrowed his brows, pointing to a tiny bird in his painting. He didn't seem satisfied. It looks very nice. I nodded vigorously in affirmation, and he finally smiled contentedly. After a while, the man painted a tree and asked the same question. I patiently praised it, saying how nice it was, and he continued, painting with relief. Fortunately, Qi was about to start painting more complex buildings, so he couldn't ask me so quickly. I moved a stool to sit next to him and rested, propping my head up to enjoy the autumn breeze, feeling quite content. Qi was so different from the monarchs I had imagined. In both stories and reality, the monarchs I'd seen were always scheming, calculating, and extremely ruthless. They were either manipulating people or strategizing for power. However, Qi was too gentle. He enjoyed the romance of nature, poetry, and the arts. If he weren't in such a royal position, he might have become a renowned poet or painter. He was soft, sentimental, and had a natural talent for composing and painting. Yet, as an emperor, this nature was not suitable. So, power was repeatedly divided among the powerful families, and now the current government was controlled by a regent. He was merely a puppet emperor. When the previous king of Qi died, the country was in turmoil. It was the regent who, with the young Qi Ci, stabilized the situation. Qi Ci was essentially raised by the regent. Thus, the regent set up a long-term plan that lasted 15 years. Since Qi Ci was 15, he started to suffer from poor health, and the imperial physicians declared he wouldn't live past 25. The person he should have trusted the most was the one who was the least forgiving. The gentleman who should have indulged in mountains and rivers was instead placed in a high position, trapped in the palace. He was eagerly awaited by many, coveted by many, and hated by many. Every decision on state affairs and people's livelihoods was beyond his control. Yet, he had to bear the blame for centuries of scorn. Later, when I became familiar with Qi Ci, I once asked him why he chose me. He had just finished a bowl of bitter medicine and, hearing my question, smiled gently at me. You stood there, the most unhappy one. You are quite similar to me. So, he used one of the few opportunities he had to make a choice in his life to bring me back. As fellow weak and helpless individuals, we ended up supporting each other. Qi Ci, as an emperor, and I, as a daughter of the Jiang family, were both unremarkable in our own ways. Yet he was skilled in the qin, calligraphy, and painting. I was good at dancing, though I had been pushed to follow my sister's path and had temporarily set it aside. Now, picking it up again, it didn't feel unfamiliar. Only with a lame leg, dancing was somewhat strenuous. Two people who had always been looked down upon and oppressed, forced to do what they didn't like, came together. It turned out to be such a delightful and harmonious pairing. He played the qin and I danced. I knew his qin was precious. He understood the difficulty of my dance. In the vast harem, it seemed only Qi Ci and I were there. He knew his fate was not in his own hands and that he was destined to live no longer than 25 years. So he clung to his solitary existence. He was too gentle, too kind, and truly not suited to be an emperor. At first, he didn't even plan to keep me. He intended to give me a sum of money and let me live a normal life outside the palace. He was meticulous in planning for everyone, even arranging good futures for his close attendants. Yet, he was left alone to count the days waiting for death and decline. In the end, I stayed. In this vast world, only by Qi Ci's side could I find a trace of warmth. We lived together for a year like this. Qi Ci's health worsened with each passing day, and recently, he had become almost blind. I cried as I spilled the bowl of medicine he was holding. Don't drink it, Qi Ci. Let's not drink it anymore, okay? The eunuch who attended to Qi Ci sneered and handed another bowl of medicine. Your Highness, you can't stop spilling the medicine like this. But if the regent finds out, he might not be pleased and could punish me. Qi Ci fumbled to take the medicine and drank it all. The eunuch left, satisfied. Warm, dry hands gently patted my head, still carrying the bitter scent of the medicine. Unable to see clearly, Qi Ci carefully wiped away my tears with his fingertips. Why are you crying? Didn't you know this day would come? His words even carried a hint of amusement, as if comforting a child. The tears flowed even more, and I couldn't speak, only grasping his wrist and burying my face in his warm palm. Qi Ci, I don't want to. Silly, it's not poison. In the midst of my emotional crying, Qi Ci suddenly laughed. I've asked my uncle for leniency. By the end of the year, the news of my death will be released, and I'll leave the palace with you. I looked up, my face still streaked with tears, looking pitiful. Really? Of course. My uncle raised me, so he does have some feelings for me. Besides, with my current state, I pose no threat to him. Finally able to show a smile, I hugged Qi Ci's arm, overwhelmed with joy. However, Qi Ci had another piece of good news for me. My sister didn't die. She became a female prime minister in Qi. Her achievements are impressive, and she is highly valued by the regent.
10.
When my sister was still around, I had someone who cared for me. When we were young, the things our parents rewarded my sister with, she would always secretly save a portion for me. When my parents hit me on the palm for not being able to recite poetry, it was my sister who came to apply medicine in the middle of the night, feeling heartbroken for me. When I had no pocket money to see rare performances of songstresses and dancers, it was my sister who gave me some of her pocket money. My sister always favored me. Even when she fell off the cliff back then, she didn't blame me. Little sister, be good and wait for someone to rescue you. Live well. On that narrow, precarious platform, my sister's warm palm was pressed against my face. My last memory of that day was of my sister in green clothes, leaping into the endless chasm. All that remained was a lingering warmth on my face. My sister was the best person to me in this world, even giving me the chance to live. So her death was the greatest pain in my heart. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have come after me and wouldn't have died. I killed my sister with my own hands, the person who loved me the most. Every day after my sister's death, I've been atoning, suffering in torment. The blow of my sister's death was greater than Yuan Su's hatred and harm, even greater than my parents' abandonment. Yet, under everyone's curses, I couldn't even enter my sister's mourning hall. Sister? When I went to see my sister, she was reviewing official documents in her residence. I nearly ran into her courtyard, throwing myself into her embrace as she looked at me in surprise. The familiar, reassuring scent. Tears dampened the front of her gown. Little sister? Sister, I miss you so much. So much to say, yet after much hesitation, only this sentence remained. When we reunited, we clung to each other for a long time. I learned that my sister had been saved by a Qi country farmer after falling off the cliff. She had been recuperating in Qi and, by chance, became a female official there. Then, why didn't Miss Jiang send a letter to the Feng family to report your safety? Qi, who had been silent, smiled, but his eyes were cold. My sister performed a bow and said, "At that time, after falling off the cliff, I lost my memory. It was only recently that I recovered it." This was quite understandable. I warmly took my sister's hand, wanting to have a meal with her. During the meal, my sister asked about my life here. Before I could answer, Qi spoke first. Driven out by my parents, injured in the left leg by friends, and exiled from my homeland. Thanks to your sister's fortune, she has endured many hardships along the way. My sister's eyes widened in surprise. I shook Qi's hand, whispering, "It's not sister's fault. What's wrong with you today?" Even in the face of the stern regent or ruthless assassins, Qi had always been calm and gentle in my memory. Yet today he was unusually strange. Why is it like this? My sister muttered, looking dazed. Qi pressed down on my hand and took another sip of tea before smiling at my sister. Did Miss Jiang never think that while she was making a name for herself here, her sister would end up in such a situation? The meal couldn't continue any longer. On the way back, I felt a bit helpless. Qi, my sister lost her memory. It was beyond her control. Qi, who had been resting with his eyes closed, was surrounded by the crisp and gentle scent of herbs in the carriage. Upon hearing my words, his narrow eyes suddenly opened. He gazed at me, full of concern, as if I were the only one amidst a world of great beauty. He remained silent for a long time, as if he wanted to say something, but simply held me close. His warm body pressed against mine, dispelling the winter's chill. All right. I hugged him tightly, knowing that we were both people who could endure much. We had long been numb, no longer caring about the cold and warmth of the world. Yet, when the other faced injustice, even a little, it still ignited a fierce anger in the heart. In this world, only we two cherished each other. But it seemed that fate in this world always kept true feelings from lasting. Here's the translation for the next section. 11. In December of the 9th year of Qi, Yuan Su suddenly invaded Qi country. At that time, Qi country's ruler, Qi was seriously ill, and the regent was entangled in disputes with the powerful families. Within a month, several border cities fell. The regent intended to negotiate peace with Yuan Su, offering to continue annual tributes and ceding 5 cities. Yuan Su ignored the offer and attacked the capital, with flames of war burning for 3 days and nights. Qi country sent Yuan Su's old acquaintance, now Qi country's female official Jiang Yi, to negotiate. After the negotiations, Yuan Su withdrew his troops to the border. Yuan Su agreed to friendly relations between the two countries, but added the condition of handing over Qi country's imperial consort, Jiang Zhu. Jiang Zhu was the person Yuan Su had previously sent to Qi country for marriage. There was a lot of speculation at the time. Some said that Qi King Qi had taken away Yuan Su's beloved, and Yuan Su's attack on Qi country was for Jiang Zhu. The strong always wield the blade. Now, without having done anything, I had become the scourge of the nation, the demoness. And Qi, kind and compassionate, had become the foolish, womanizing ruler. Just as when I was married to Qi country, this time I had no choice. Yet Qi was furious and even argued with the regent in the court. As a puppet emperor, he had always followed whatever the regent proposed, merely a process of stamping and issuing orders. He had always been a modest gentleman, gentle in nature, and had never objected to anything taken away from him. However, this time, he openly confronted the regent in the court. Facing the pressure from many senior officials, he did not retreat a single step. Heaven wants to destroy my great Qi. If the late king saw how His Majesty is now obsessed with women and ignores the advice of loyal ministers, he would be heartbroken. Even if I am weak in nature, there are still people I must protect with my life. She will not return. Uncle, she will either stay and everyone will be happy, or she will be buried with me today. Qi held my hand firmly, not yielding an inch even under the gaze of his feared uncle. He was the one who saved me from Yuan Su. He had seen my wounds and my lifeless state. He knew better than anyone that Yuan Su's side was held to me. He had picked me up from others, nurtured me with all his strength, and now was being forced to return me to the original owner. Even if he had to die, he would not leave me alone. A tear fell from his eye, dampening Qi's hand. He could resist everyone's pressure for me. That was his choice. But I couldn't allow him to be criticized by thousands because of me. That was my choice. To protect me, he wasn't just fighting against his uncle. He was resisting the expectations of countless people, the fate of the common people under the throne, the eternal infamy, and the long-lasting stigma of future generations. Though he was kind and compassionate, if not for me, he would never have made such a decision labeled as selfish. On the day I left, Qi did not come to see me off. The regent had confined him. My sister entrusted me with a letter for our parents. Leaving the palace gate, I saw the carriage sent by Yuan Su to pick me up. The wind lifted a corner of the carriage curtain, revealing a bit of light from inside. Long time no see. It was inevitable. I finally mustered the courage to move forward, but then I heard the sound of a guqin from the city gate. I suddenly looked back. That person hurriedly grabbed a guqin, broke free from the restraints of those behind him, and desperately ran to the nearest place to the palace gate. Tears filled my eyes in an instant. Qi, in his blue robes without his outer cloak, his collar loose. He had always been meticulous about his appearance, yet now his clothes were disheveled. The long journey from his palace to the city gate, his impaired vision, how many times must he have stumbled? Yet, upon seeing me, he settled down, sitting on the ground and playing the guqin. It was a new piece he had composed, one he had never played for me because the score was incomplete. Yet, unexpectedly, I heard the complete piece at this moment. The regent's guards, who had been sent to watch him, finally stopped their pursuit. I took one last, deep look at him and walked toward Yuan Su's carriage. I really wanted to be an ordinary couple with you, Qi. But this world never accommodates ordinary people. As I lifted the carriage curtain, I was forcefully pulled inside. The man wrapped me in his embrace, his slightly stubbly chin gently rubbing against my forehead. Zhuzi, let's not be separated again.
12.
Sister is still alive. When Yuan Su touched me, I cautiously retreated a bit, pressing my back against the carriage wall. I never wanted to harm your sister. To me, Yuan Su seemed no different from a madman. To protect myself, I quickly clarified the situation and misunderstandings. Yuan Su leaned in and embraced me, his hand resting on my neck, gently caressing me. I know. He spoke softly, his voice more tender than ever. Since you know, why still come after me? It was truly perplexing. If not to torment me, what did Yuan Su want? You should go find your sister and rekindle your old relationship. After all, he loved her so much. Now that all misunderstandings and difficulties were resolved, they should reunite and love each other again. That's all in the past. Yuan Su abruptly interrupted, holding my face with an unusually serious expression. What I want now is only you. Everything seemed absurd. After learning that my sister was still alive, my parents took the initiative to visit me in the palace, apologizing for their previous misunderstanding. Yuan Su, too, had completely changed his behavior towards me, treating me with exceptional tenderness. He even proposed to make me his empress. He said it was something he owed me. Yet, amidst all this kindness, I felt like I was sitting on pins and needles. The wild dog that once deliberately bit you had suddenly become a passionate and loving dog. I soon discovered the reason. In Yuan Su's study, I found a letter detailing a conversation between Zhuzi and my sister. The letter recorded in detail how my sister revealed the truth of the past under Zhuzi's inducement and coercion. My sister was ambitious and unwilling to be confined in a small corner. The day she fell off the cliff was a trap she had long planned, allowing her to escape Yuan Su's country and disappear. Perhaps she had once had feelings for Yuan Su in her youth, but she was unwilling to become his consort, abandoning her own aspirations to become a man's subordinate. In Yuan's country, there was no official position for women, so she faked her death and went to Qi country to become an official. To fulfill her grand ambitions. The letter was too light, just 2 thin sheets. The paper was too heavy, making it impossible for me to hold. Eventually, it fell, shaking, onto the damp, cold floor. I instinctively looked down, and the floor, reflecting the flickering candlelight, showed my thin, pale face. The once round, chubby cheeks of a little glutton who always wanted 2 bowls of rice per meal had now become so emaciated. The eyes that used to sparkle were now dim and lifeless. The red marks from being beaten with a ruler had gradually faded, replaced by old calluses from manual labor. So that's how it is. Just a few short lines of text had crushed half of my life. I wondered why Zhuzi seemed so strange when he met my sister that day. I always thought fate was cruel, making ordinary people suffer under its caprice. Now I realized that those who control fate could be high-ranking individuals, the favored ones, their whims and plans shaping the lives of countless ordinary people. How interesting. My life had become a sacrificial pawn for others' ambitions, a thing to be trampled and manipulated at will. Zhuzi had not told me at the time, perhaps fearing that discovering this truth would add to my anguish. But now, he had sent the letter to Yuan Su as I was being taken away, hoping to clear up misunderstandings and treat me well. Then there should be a copy for my parents as well. Their attitude towards me had changed so drastically. Zhuzi knew, and it weighed heavily on me, those biases and injustices. Zhuzi, the nurse said you came to my study to read. The door to the study was pushed open, and Yuan Su saw the scattered letter papers and my tear-streaked face. His expression shifted from shock and panic to remorse. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you about these things after some time. Really? I looked coldly into his eyes. I no longer had the patience to play along with these schemes filled with calculations. If I hadn't discovered it, you would never have told me. It would have remained hidden for a lifetime. And my parents as well. Yuan Su stepped forward, trying to pull me into his embrace, but I avoided him. His hand, suspended in midair, stayed there for a long time before gently and helplessly falling back down. It's all in the past. Now that you're well and by my side, I will only have you from now on. Jiangzhu, let's go back to how we were before. Before? I smiled, my lips curling wider until it seemed even my tears would turn into laughter. I laughed madly until I was out of breath, coughing violently and wiping away the tears from my eyes. Yuan Su, sage. Your Majesty. Can you really get over it?
Of course you can.
You're just speaking for yourself, venting your anger on innocent people, giving orders. Even if you lost your memory, someone desperately rescued you. What have you lost? You've lost nothing. You can get over it easily. And me? I'm labeled a murderer by everyone, despised, slandered. On the streets, I'm pelted with vegetable leaves and eggs, even threatened publicly. At night, I have to lock all doors and windows to protect myself from her pursuers who might come in and endanger my life. Can I get over it? My frantic accusation left my eyes bloodshot. Yuan Su, panicked, reached out to grab my hand, trying to calm me down. Zhuzi. I pushed him away and stepped back a few paces. And you, my dear Majesty. How did I get crippled? You had 1,001 ways to drive away the bandits, but you intentionally sought revenge, wounding me with an arrow. That arrow penetrated my bone. Yuan Su, how much do you hate me? I tore at my skirt to reveal a noticeably thin and misshapen leg. Then I suddenly remembered something and pulled open my clothes to show Yuan Su a scar that looked like a giant centipede running down my back. Oh, and this scar. How did it come about? You haven't forgotten, have you? It was for you. To save you, I was cut by that bandit's knife. It wasn't this ugly, but to save on medicine, I dragged myself in the dark cave, enduring the thorns on my back, repeatedly scraping and tearing it until it oozed. Even the best medicine couldn't completely heal it. Stop talking. Yuan Su's eyes reddened as he looked at the scar. Why stop? Because you think I'm too pitiful to hear? But what you can't bear to hear is my own experience, Your Majesty. Your Majesty might want to see my back again. I revealed my entire back covered with interlaced scars. Chi Ci used the best medicine to apply on it every night, but it couldn't completely erase them. The pink, dark, and horrifyingly red inflamed flesh. These were inflicted by the nuns at Yunding Temple. They were afraid to hit visible places, so they only beat here. Again and again, before it healed, it was reopened. I'm sorry. I didn't know the people there would. Yuan Su's eyes widened in shock, and his trembling hands reached out to touch the scars. How could you not know? A once wealthy woman, abandoned and falling into the hands of resentful nuns. Did Your Majesty never hear of it? I laughed softly. Every day and night, working desperately, eating a stale bun, then sleeping. In the morning, beaten to get up and work. Your Majesty, tell me, can I get over it? Yuan Su, don't you think it's ridiculous for you to tell me you love me now? Yuan Su pulled me into his embrace, repeatedly apologizing. You have me now and your parents. Everything will be all right. Trust me, Zhuzi, everything will be fine. I didn't struggle, letting the gold thread on his clothes brush against my face. It won't be fine. Do you really think I don't know why you didn't tell me the truth? What for me? Do you think I believe that? Or is it for Jiang Yi? You're afraid I would tell everyone and ruin her reputation, aren't you? I know, I've known for a long time. Yuan Su's body stiffened for a moment. I smiled, as expected. Who would come to my rescue? Who would care about my suffering? No one. A common person's suffering can never compete with the fame of a prodigy. It can't be compared. The only person who loved me was in a foreign land. If you don't love me, why insist on taking me back, Yuan Su? Isn't it true that people like you, who discard things once picked up and repaired, must be reclaimed? Yuan Su, I already have a home there, but you, in the name of love, lightly destroyed it. Aren't you pleased? I couldn't cry any longer. My heart and throat had been blocked for too long. I noticed a small pair of scissors on the ground. I picked it up and thrust it with all my strength into Yuan Su's chest. Without any mercy. The sound of the sharp object piercing flesh and bone was heard. Yuan Su groaned, gripping my hand. With the scissors still in hand, he pressed it deeper into his chest. While doing this, he kept looking at my face. Only when he saw my numb, dead eyes did he seem to finally believe that I was truly trying to kill him. Holding me in his arms with the scissors still piercing his chest, he spoke softly. Zhuzi, you can stab me 1,000 times in the heart. From the moment you saved me from the cave, from the first time I saw you after losing my memory, I've only had you in my heart. There may have been wavering and confusion after I recover my memory, but the past is past. During the time you were away, I've come to understand my own heart. I only love you. I nodded and smeared the hot blood on his face. You love me. Then can you, like you once loved my sister, torture those who harmed her 1,000 times? Yuan Su was stunned. 13. My parents came to see me, but as soon as I saw their faces, I couldn't help but vomit uncontrollably. I was afraid and kept hiding. That small pair of scissors seemed to have become my only means of defense. Anyone who came near me was met with its sharp edge. So no one dared to approach me, except Yuan Su. To prove his love, Yuan Su repeatedly came close to me, only to be wounded by the scissors each time. It seemed that someone had intentionally spread the truth about Jiang Yi's fall from grace. My parents could not suppress the rumors, and Yuan Su, for some reason, did not intervene. Thus, Jiang Yi's fall from grace became public knowledge. The once pure and flawless goddess was now tainted with the stains of deep scheming and betrayal. No one knew who was behind it, but I knew. It was Zhuzi. In this world, only one person cared about my grievances and the injustices I suffered. Only Zhuzi, who had crossed thousands of miles, a puppet emperor in his own country, might use every means he had just to clear my name. At night, Yuan Su came again. He would routinely extract the scissors embedded 3 inches into his arm, bandage himself, and then hold me tightly. Ignoring my struggles, he would rest his head on my shoulder. Are you happy today? He asked cautiously. What is there to be happy about, Jiang Yi? It's not that. Even if she has done such things, she will still be admired for her achievements as a female minister despite her lack of virtue. Yuan Su was stumped by my words. After a long silence, he held me tighter and said, Then I'll help you kill her. I lowered my gaze. You're not helping me. I don't want to kill her. You're doing it just to prove your love. It's for yourself. Then what should I do, Zhuzi? The man buried his face in my shoulder, his voice filled with helplessness and sadness. What should I do for us to live well together? Yuan Su took great care of me, attending to nearly everything himself, combing my hair, helping me put on shoes and socks, applying makeup. He studied recipes daily to ensure I ate better and gained weight. Yet I continued to lose weight day by day. He found an excuse to exile my parents and created difficulties for Jiang Yi in Qi country. He demoted all the nuns who had troubled me at Yunding Temple to slave status. He cleared up every instance of harm inflicted upon me, imprisoning anyone who had offended me or treated me disrespectfully. He seemed to go to great lengths to show his favoritism and unique affection for me because he knew I had been ignored since childhood. Thus, he knew it and could have done it long ago. But he chose to wait until the flowers withered and died before he frantically watered and sunbathed them. The 15-year-old Jiang Zhu and the 25-year-old Jiang Zhu wanted different things. In the endless silence, I finally began to crumble bit by bit. Yuan Su seemed at a loss about what to do. He searched for famous doctors everywhere, but to no avail. Every night he held me and said, Zhuzi, just wait a bit longer. Everything will be fine. He held me tightly, as if afraid I might fly away. However, after a few days, Yuan Su could no longer stay with me. The Xiongnu, taking advantage of the chaos, attacked Qi country. Their ultimate goal was to capture Qi, and then annex Yuan country. Yuan Su needed to quickly mobilize troops and lead them into battle. Before he left, he made many instructions. He insisted I wait for him. Yuan Su ultimately won, defeating the Xiongnu. Yet, Qi country, caught in the middle of the war, was devastated. On the day Qi country fell, Qi Wang Qi committed suicide at the city gates. Yuan Su returned triumphantly. I prepared my attire and, in a green dress, leaped from the Zhaixing Tower towards Qi country's direction. I had known all along. A person as righteous and compassionate as he was, even if weak as a ruler, would never survive his country's fall. To die with his country was his responsibility. His nature was weak, but he had never evaded it. I too did not. Losing weight day by day was my own doing. If he could only live to 25, I couldn't let him be alone. Even now, though we had never promised to live or die together, only by being together could we truly live. In the moment I fell from the high tower, the noise behind me was overwhelming. I suddenly recalled that winter, the first time we met. The man in a fox fur coat, holding a warm stove, smiled gently at me. Xiao Zhu. Epilogue. Qi had said he would fake his death and leave the palace at the end of the year to live a common life with Jiangzhu. He was lying to him. The regent was too suspicious and would never allow him to leave his sight before he was truly dead. Moreover, he might not even make it to the end of the year. When the time came, he would enter the imperial tomb. Jiangzhu would be sent away by those he arranged to live a leisurely and happy life outside the palace. On the day Jiangzhu left Qi country, Qi spent an entire day and night playing the zither at the city gate. The empty city echoed with the sound of the strings, soaked in blood, as Qi played his final piece, sending off the woman he loved most with his favorite music. The day Jiangzhu jumped from Zhaixing Tower was also the day Yuan Su returned to the capital. Leaving the main army behind, Yuan Su, in light armor and on horseback, experienced a moment of unprecedented urgency. Having won the victory, the next step was to meet the woman he loved most. But when he reached Zhaixing Tower, Jiangzhu, in her green dress, fell like a leaf drifting in the wind. She fell so slowly that Yuan Su thought he could catch her if he ran fast enough, but he was too late to grasp her. The red and green bloomed simultaneously. From then on, the emperor would see no more spring. During his attack on Qi country, Yuan Su had been driven by a certain temper and an indescribable rage. It wasn't until he met Jiang Yi, who had become a female minister, that he understood. She, elegant and wise in her official robes, was as dazzling as when they first met. She hadn't died, something he had longed for and sought in vain. Yet upon meeting her now, Yuan Su found that besides feeling gratified and relieved, he couldn't recapture any of the initial emotions. He was lost until Jiang Yi awakened him. "Who did His Majesty attack Qi country for?" she asked. "The youthful feelings are like the river flowing east. What occupies your heart now is no longer me." Yuan Su fell into a drowsy sleep at night, always dreaming of a woman. In a dark cave, amidst rising water, only those fragile hands, like the most resilient bamboo, pulled him through to a place of light. That was Jiangzhu. Yuan Su remembered the first time he met her. The young girl, with her head bowed and neck like delicate bamboo, cried while copying books, careful not to let her tears wet the pages. "Brother." She looked up with her round, adorable face, like the fat cats in the imperial kitchen. "How do you read the words on this page?" Yes, it was Jiangzhu. In the 4th year of the Huaihong era, the empress passed away and was posthumously honored as Empress Xiahua. In the 8th year of Huaihong, the emperor passed away. Without a wife or children, the throne was passed to the Duke of Dingbei. The emperor and Empress Xiahua were buried together in the imperial tomb. This love may be remembered and cherished, but only as a memory. The end.